Counting down. Go.
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Steve Freese. I am the news and features editor at Our Detroit Magazine. And this is our LGBTQ virtual political summit, which was an idea that was hatched about a week ago. So we apologize for the lack of warning. But the idea here was to see if we could get as many of the LGBTQ elected officials in Michigan in our area to join us all together for something somewhat unique, a sort of virtual convention, something that we probably could never have done prior to the pandemic and the common use of Zoom, because the idea of getting all these people in one place at the same time is probably impossible. But I thought it would be very interesting because we have an interesting place in this country, in Michigan, where on the one hand, we were very late to the gay marriage victory. One of our cases was one of the last cases at the Supreme Court to allow people to marry. We don't have a statewide LGBTQ human rights ordinance of any sort. And yet we also happen to have something in the neighborhood of 35 or 40 openly LGBTQ elected officials. I did not know that until I started looking into it. I did not realize there were that many, which is how this turned into a convention as opposed to a little Zoom interview for a story that I will be writing for Our Detroit in June for our gay pride coverage. It is interesting to note that, let me just run down a few statistics from the Victory Institute. There are 982 total LGBTQ elected officials nationwide, so not even 1,000. That accounts for a fifth of 1% of all of the elected officials in this country. A very, very small number. So the fact that Michigan has a bunch of those is impressive. We generally hear about the folks who are statewide, Senate, governor. We don't often hear about the people who probably have a lot more impact on our daily lives, the people who make the decisions about our cities, our schools, our counties, and our state. So the way this is going to work, we have about a dozen of these folks, of about 16 people who I tried to reach to come on with us. 12 of them are expected to be with us tonight. We're going to start with a conversation with the 2 school board members who are present. We were supposed to have 3 school board members, but Mike McGuinness, who is the president of the Pontiac school board, they have a meeting tonight, and he thought this would be a little bit later, so he committed to coming, and he may show up later. But right now, our first 15 or so minutes, we'll be having a conversation about education and about LGBTQ people in education and why these people have decided to run for public office. I'd like to introduce Saline Schools board member Susan Estep, which I hope, Estep, I made notes to myself to ask you how to say it over and over again. I knew I'd get it wrong. And Southfield board member Amani Johnson. It is really great to have you both. And I'm really interested in the conversation about schools because I used to be a school district reporter. I covered the school district in Las Vegas for a few years in the 90s. And at the time, it was it was surprising even to have an openly gay teacher, or it was scandalous to have an openly gay or lesbian principal, or it was just unheard of. Me as an out gay journalist gave some of the school board members a little bit of pause when I first met them. And so I'm curious to know, you both are pretty young. Amani, I believe you're the youngest ever to be elected to your board. And I think you might be just out of the cradle. I don't know, how old are you?
I'm 24.
You're 24.
I'm
okay.
The youngest elected official in Southfield.
Okay, and Susan, it looks to me like from what I see of your resume that you have a little bit more of a traditional background for a school board member. So I'd like to start with Amani for a second. Why would somebody at your age be interested in being a school board member as opposed to a city councilman? You don't have children, I guess, I'm assuming. Yeah. And so I'm curious to know what was the motivation, and was your status as a gay man at all a part of it?
So I did actually run for city council in 2019 in Southfield. I came in 6 out of 12, so I didn't win. But a lot of the issues that I was focused on then are also things that I could initiate as a part of the school district, like providing job and skilled trades opportunities for our kids, and building a better relationship with our municipalities and the school district. And honestly, a lot of the things when I was a kid, a lot of the problems that our district had are still problems to this day. And that's the same experience that our other older board members have had. We have board members that are 40 that had the exact same negative experiences in our schools that I did. So I was hoping to be able to provide a better experience for future kids.
Okay, and so first of all, let's go back 1 second.
Yeah.
You're 24 years old, you ran for city council. What's the hurry? Like, why are you in such a rush to be in politics?
Well, why wait? I mean, I've known what I've wanted to do my entire life, and it's work in politics. So that's what I went to school for, and it's what I am doing.
So the school board, did you encounter any concerns about you being gay as you ran for the school board? Did it come up? Was it something you were real public about when you were running? Tell me how it went.
So no, it's not something I would bring up at any doors. But I'm always willing to have the conversation with people. I think, I'm sorry, could you repeat your question for me?
Well, I was just wondering, how you dealt with that as part of your bio when you were running for office.
If I'm being honest, it just wasn't a part of my bio. And I'll say that that's probably the same experience for a lot of candidates in this area. I'm honest if anyone asks, but it's not something that I bring up. And honestly, I never had a single voter ever ask me about my sexual orientation.
Okay. Susan, you're a mom. And you have children. Do you have children who go to the school district in Saline? Mm-hmm. So what was your motivation to run? Did you feel like there was a void there, that there was not a representative available to speak to certain types of issues that you wanted to be there for?
Oh, yes. So my story begins in 2010 when me and my wife moved to Saline. And we wanted a house in the country and to raise our child. And so, found a beautiful piece of property. Sorry if my internet goes out. I rural. So, but yeah, I discovered after we moved here that the school board was having a meeting about their non-discrimination policy. And so they were trying to make the language more inclusive to include sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And so I heard there was like some negative press on that. So I went out to the meeting, and I spoke, and my son was just born. And I spoke out and I said, my son's going to be in the school district. He's going to have 2 moms. Like, this impacts him. This impacts students who, want to be protected. And we want our children to be protected. And so they voted no on adopting that language. And I remember, so my son was just born. And so I remember leaving that meeting, and I'm like, someday I'm going to run for school board and I'm going to change it. So I'm proud to say I'm getting some people not putting it on the agenda, but I am the policy chair, and I have presented that we change that. So it's revised and going to the board soon. So I'm super excited about that. But it's been over 10 years and it's still not there in the language. So yeah, that was my big first time I ever thought about it. So
and Saline, is Saline a more conservative? It's rural. It's definitely not Ann Arbor. Is it a more conservative area?
So yes, from I guess my perspective, coming as an LGBTQ person, also we have people from marginalized communities who also feel the same way when they moved here, get the, oh my God, like, what are you doing in Saline? So it does have that reputation, and I think we feel it probably a little more, being marginalized. But I've discovered when I started running, I got a lot of people behind me. We had someone who was super conservative, has spoken out against LGBTQ students and against progressive sex ed. And so I'm like, now's the time I need to run. He cannot be on that board. And so definitely brought up him in the campaign and running against him. And I got a lot of supporters that came out. And so realized that there were more people in the community that, that are more like me and progressive. And so I think, we've built this community and been able to speak out, and people are more accepting and able to call out those people who are not accepting and who are trying to make our community toxic.
So Amani, does Southfield have any kind of human rights ordinance or any kind of protections for LGBTQ students or teachers?
I know that there's a non-discrimination policy, but I'm not 100% sure if it does protect LGBTQ students. And it's not honestly something I thought about at the district level until Susan just brought it up. But I mean, it's something that
we'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk. But I grew up, or I was in college and I was an RA. And a lot of what we used to do was social and emotional learning. So a lot of emphasis, I like to put a lot of emphasis on teaching other kids about equity and diversity, just because we talk about what we need to do to prepare them for the workplace and for their futures. And I think that that's something that we've lacked in the previous years.
I feel like one of the issues that's coming at you on school boards, and then also probably more or less the state legislature, is this question that is out there right now about transgender student athletes. Has anybody brought this to you? Is this a problem, or is this a concern that has come up yet in your school districts? And have you thought about how you'll answer it when it does?
I have not heard anything from any parents or anyone at all in reference to that. But my position on it is that I think that any kid should be able to play whatever sport they want, regardless of their gender identity.
Susan?
Yes. So in Michigan, I was happy to see that the Michigan High School Sports Association, there's some acronym associated with that, but they made statements whenever these recent bills came out to ban transgender students from participating in sports. And so, it seems like they have a process in place already. They only get a few classes over years and have been able to support transgender students, and no other parents have come to have any issues with it or anything. So they've spoken up in support. I recently, again, policy chair, brought to our policy committee a policy that was actually passed recently from Plymouth Canton Public Schools and through their board. And it's the transgender and gender nonconforming students policy. And so I brought this to our policy committee recently, and I've had great pushback from the leadership. And so I'm being pulled back, which is unfortunate. So as if we haven't been through enough in Saline, we're supposed to get buy-in from the community on this, even though it comes up time after time with people degrading our transgender students and our curriculum. So that's one thing that I want to get past, and I think it's more urgent now than it has been.
Just so I know, Saline has how many students altogether, the whole school district?
We're around 5,000.
5,000?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, and Southfield, do you have any idea how many students you have in your school district?
Yeah, about 6,000. So they're about
they're similar. Wow, you wouldn't think that, because Saline is this rural area and Southfield is a more, suburban urban area. So, I mean, do you both know of transgender students in your school district? I mean, do you know them personally?
I don't personally.
Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
Go on.
And have they spoken about wanting to play sports? Are they concerned about being able to play in the gender that they identify with?
Specifically surrounding sports, I think in general, we've had things come up with specifically locker rooms, restrooms. Again, these things were the administration has been wonderful in working with these students one-on-one, and the families of transgender and non-binary students. When locker room came up, it was a parent who brought to the board that their children who were cisgendered were in a locker room with somebody who was transgender. And so, no other issue between like in elementary school, and then got into middle school. And so that's when they had, the locker rooms and everything. So just a small, very loud conservative group came out, and it was really sad because, who.
Oh, no. Oh,
I think it was a really good thought.
The conservatives have taken over your Zoom feed. This is terrible. Well, I'm really sorry that she got caught. Amani, anything to add before we move on from this question about, have you actually had a chance to go into schools and meet with, I don't know, do they have like a a gay club, or a queer or LGBTQ. I'm not sure what they would call it at this point. But do they have a club? Have you been into the schools to talk to them, the kids at all?
So we had a gay straight alliance when I was in high school here, but actually no. So our district has been fully virtual since March of last year. And then just in March, we started to open up a hybrid program. So I haven't actually gotten the opportunity to really be in the same room as other board members, let alone students and teachers.
All right. If you are just joining us on Facebook, my name is Steve Freese. I am the news and features editor of Our Detroit magazine. We have a whole group of openly gay and lesbian and bisexual, no transgender, elected officials in the Detroit metro area with us. We're going to move on now to talking to our city council folks. And I just want to remind you, you can write us questions through the Facebook site. And also at the end of the sections that we have with the different sets of people, I'll open it up to the public for questions through us, and also perhaps some of you folks might have questions for one another as well. So, all right, so we're going to move on to the city municipalities, and we have a full panel. Nobody had other obligations tonight. We have Luke Londo. He is a city councilman in Hazel Park. We have Mike McFall, also a city council member in Hazel Park. We have Greg Pawlica. I'm sure I said that wrong. I asked for the pronunciation. I got it wrong anyway, as well. But he is not on camera, unfortunately, because his connection is not very good. He's in Ferndale. Jason Hoskins, who is a city council member in Southfield. And finally, we have Joe Rozell, who is a city commissioner, because they had to be different, in Huntington Woods. So that's a bunch of people. I guess I'd like to start by asking, since we had a conversation about Southfield with Amani, I'm curious to know from Jason, you also have an openly gay mayor, Ken Siver, who was not able to join us. What is it about Southfield? Like, I think of Southfield, I think of like, isn't it like an Orthodox Jewish area? I mean, it's an interesting place, but what is it about Southfield that there are so many out people, and not just out people, but also out people of color, which is rather unusual in politics. Talk a little, explain Southfield to us, please.
Well, that's a lot to talk about in that, but all right. I don't know. I don't know what's in the water that makes Southfield so attractive for LGBTQ elected officials, but I am certainly glad to be a part of it. You know, our Southfield slogan is the center of it all. And I don't know if because of that we attract so much, just like you mentioned, we do have, a big Orthodox Jewish population. We have obviously a big African-American population. We have a lot of diversity in the city, and that's something I actually love about the city. But as far as openly gay elected officials stepping up and being a part of the process, not sure what, but I'm glad to be a part of it though. So
you also are the chief of staff, I believe, to State Senator Jeremy Moss. Am I correct about that?
Yeah,
who we'll be talking to a little later. So you kind of been at the forefront of politics and LGBTQ politics for quite a long time. How did that start for you?
So much like Amani, working in politics, working in government is something that I always wanted to do. Went to school for it too. I worked for Senator Moss's predecessor at the time, Rudy Hobbs, when he was a state representative representing us. And then after that, then Representative Hobbs, he actually recommended me to Senator Moss to work on his campaign for state representative. Rudy Hobbs, he decided to run for Congress. And so Jeremy ran for his House seat. And Rudy recommended me to work in his campaign. And at that point, I had actually never been on a campaign, and this was a job to manage Jeremy's State House campaign. And I was telling Rudy, I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I've never done it before. And Rudy was like, don't worry about it. Jeremy will tell you everything. And he did. And I did end up working on that campaign, and we ended up winning. Built a good relationship with Jeremy, and then started working in his office in Lansing, and been working with Jeremy since. It's definitely been a great experience for me.
So the city council members we have here are from Hazel Park, Ferndale, Southfield, which apparently is a gay mecca nobody realized existed, and I'm curious about, and I'm just curious about in Huntington Woods, which is also sort of well known. Are there LGBTQ issues there? Like, are these places where we're like past that? And I was going to ask Greg this question because I'm looking around, and Ferndale was the place where we had our first out gay mayor in the state, back in, I don't know, you guys probably know, 15, 20 years ago.
2007.
Thank you. Thank you. And I see that in 2019, Ferndale made news because you painted the crosswalk to be the rainbow colors. So I guess, I mean, is Ferndale, Hazel Park, are these like post-gay issues? Like, I mean, are you guys so far ahead of the rest of the state that you're just dealing with potholes and
No. The fight for LGBT community or equality is never over, regardless of what community you are in. I don't think any LGBTQ person in any community in Michigan will feel any level of comfort until the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act is updated to include the LGBT community.
Okay. Can one of you explain? I mean, I could, but can Mike? Can you explain what he's talking about?
So, yeah. So we just passed actually in Hazel Park a human rights ordinance that included sexual orientation and gender identity, which the Elliott Larson Act does not actually have included in it. And I know Senator Jeremy Moss could speak more to this because I know that he has been working on having that added. But yeah, so like Greg mentioned, the battle is never over. I mean, because every time we take one step forward, someone else tries to make us take a step back. So I don't think Ferndale, Hazel Park, anybody that's in one of the inner ring suburbs has any hold on LGBTQ issues. Tends to be a very friendlier place than other communities, I would imagine. But yeah, no, I would agree with Greg though that the battle is never over.
Now, I'm going to ask Mike this question because Luke has been on this city council for about 5 minutes. So, Mike, were you the author of that? It just passed. It goes into effect in the next week.
Yeah, it goes into effect the 23rd.
It's a human rights ordinance that prohibits what?
So I actually did not author it. Initially, Luke and myself and one other city council member, Alyssa Sullivan, met in 2019 to actually start discussing putting together a human rights ordinance for the city. So I actually would defer to Luke to talk about the details because he's actually the one that compiled it and helped put it together with our city attorney. So I'll let Luke do that.
Okay.
He should take credit for what he did.
Thanks, Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion about like post-gay issues, because I think in communities like Ferndale and Hazel Park, we're really sort of on the back end. But when you look at the rest of the state, particularly the Upper Peninsula, where I hail from, still very pre. And I think it's really important for communities like ours that are more inclusive to take the opportunity to pass a human rights ordinance, which in Hazel Park would ban discrimination on the basis of employment, housing, and public accommodations and services. And that codifies what's common practice in Hazel Park, but it's important to remind the public that the only way to provide any level of protection for the LGBTQ community is city by city, ordinance by ordinance, because the state is to fail to amend the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. So when I joined council, I was very proud to do that, but I wouldn't say it was needed, but definitely still appreciate it.
Yeah, I think what it does also is it helps send a message to the state that, you know, the citizens want this, so and it's needed. So I think, like Luke said, you know, passing it city by city, while it's a little more difficult way to do it, I think part of it is sending a message to Lansing that we need this.
Is there something like this brewing in Huntington Woods or in Southfield?
I mean, I'll just say in Huntington Woods, we were one of the first cities to adopt a human rights ordinance. It was challenged by outside groups outside of the city, the ordinance. It went on the ballot, and the voters ultimately upheld the ordinance. So we had a human rights ordinance years ago. And then recently, I introduced an ordinance to ban conversion therapy within Huntington Woods. We were the first municipality in our state to do that. And that was a direct message to Lansing as well, because Lansing was failing to move this policy forward, a policy that's very harmful to our younger folks. And so in Huntington Woods, it was unanimous vote of the city commission to adopt this ordinance. It was not challenged during the referendum period. So I think we have a very progressive community here, and one that sort of embraces these issues. I mean, we were the center of drag queen story time, and that whole.
I was just about to get to that. That was the big hot controversy when libraries were open back in the day before pandemics, that there was this whole thing in Huntington Woods where there was a group that was angry that there were drag queens reading stories to kids at the library. Whatever happened with that whole thing?
Well, it's a very popular program, and when this sort of became a big issue, I started receiving a lot of contact, and I was kind of at first taken back until I realized that the contact was from people who lived outside of our community, and that the folks who lived here were overwhelmingly in support of maintaining this program. We had close to 500 people attend our city commission meeting. We had to move it to the rec center. It by far exceeded the capacity limitations of our commission chambers. Probably 100 people of the 500 spoke, and 97 of them were in support and only about 3 against. And the 3 against, again, were from outside the community. We decided to keep that programming. I think it's important that our library offer a diverse level of programming to our residents, because we have a diverse group of folks that live here. And so the commission was very supportive of that program, and we've maintained it through all of that. The protesting died off, and it sort of became a thing of the past, and the program now continues sort of unfettered. But yeah, it was surprising to see some of the pushback, but then I realized it wasn't from folks who are residents of our community.
So, okay, so Luke, I'm it's your turn. And I'm curious, you're one of 2 bisexual people who are among the folks who have agreed to join us, and so far as I can tell, are elected officials in the state. And I wonder, and you're also married to a woman. So I'm curious to know, normally, I don't know normal, but when elected officials or candidates come out of the closet or tell their constituents what they are, they do it because they have to, because they because they have a family, or they don't want to create any kind of scandal. They just want to be themselves and tell everybody about themselves. Why was it important to you to be out as bi, given that your personal life is that you have a wife and you look like a straight guy?
I think one of the answers to that is because the last thing we need in politics is people thinking that there's another straight white man making decisions for them. But on a more serious note, bi erasure is it's a very real phenomenon. We tend to be underrepresented, not just politics, but in pretty much every public-facing career. I was out long before I met my wife, and I met my wife about 10, 11 years ago, and she's been my biggest cheerleader and supporter. But I'm proud of who I am. My wife's proud of who I am, and I think it's important to, we're all public officials, and it's important to be open and transparent and honest with the public.
Now, the fact of the matter is that people are just fine with you being bi, but you do have another secret, which is that you have been a Republican or an operative for people like Bill Schuette. What has changed in your world? Because it was only a couple of years ago you were involved with the Schuette campaign, and I mean, he was not a friend to LGBTQ people. How do you reconcile that?
As far as what's changed, I wouldn't say a whole lot, to be completely honest with you. Being the candidate myself instead of working for a candidate is definitely a different dynamic, and it allows me to be more open. But I'd say Bill Schuette is one of the more misunderstood people in politics. From his lens, he was defending the Constitution, defending the laws that were on the books. And without his vociferous defense of the constitutional amendment that banned same-sex marriage, we don't get a circuit split in the 6th. We don't get the Supreme Court case of Bergefell, and we don't get same-sex marriage nationwide. That said, I think there's been a little bit of an evolution. The change from working for Bill Schuette to running on a progressive platform, raising money with Act Blue is probably a little bit jarring for the public. But honestly, it's a matter of priority on the local level. At the local level, equal rights, growing our revenue base, and making government more transparent tends to be on the more progressive side of the dime. And at the local level, those are the issues that are important to me.
Speaking of working with people who have significantly different points of view than you, I'm going to open this up to any of the city council or city commissioner people. I'm curious to know, have you had fights? Have you had awkward homophobic moments with your colleagues? And I'm not sure how to handle, maybe you raise your hand and I'll call on you. I don't know. Okay, Luke.
I worked in Republican politics, so I've obviously got a little bit of tea. So back in 2015, I was running for state committeeman to represent the 1st district to the state Michigan Republican Party. And an anonymous email went out to every single precinct delegate. There was about 300 of them essentially outing me, which was cute because I've been out since 2006. So I think for a lot of them, it might have been news, but for anybody that knew me, it was like, all right, cool. But the email said I was sleeping with the district Republican chair, and that my wife was either in on it or cool with it. I don't exactly remember the details, but it ended up backfiring because I was running for one of 3 state committeeman slots, and I ended up getting the highest vote getter, or I was the highest vote getter. A little bit of pearl clutching from some elderly delegates, but for the most part, people were genuinely annoyed.
Anybody else? Mike.
So initially when I started talking about running for city council, because this is the first time I've ever ran for office, I had a few people that had told me about running in Hazel Park as an openly gay man, that it was going to be an issue. I'm not so sure that was homophobic, but I think it kind of was a stereotype of the city that they had, because I've actually, while I've had a couple of people make comments, I wouldn't exactly call them the most derogatory comments because they weren't really that creative, but for the most part in the city here, like our moniker is that we're the friendly city. And for the most part, it has been a very pleasant experience. Like I haven't really had, and I've been open Like I was on my website, pictures of me and my husband together. I always mentioned it in articles. I never felt that I had to be secret about it at all here. But I think a few of the people that, I don't know if they were just concerned, but they kind of told me to play it low, not to really talk much about it. And I don't function that way. So I didn't really have much of an issue with it.
Before we move on to the next section, I do want to ask Jason Hoskins this question in Southfield. There are, and I meant to ask Amani as well, so if Amani wants to come in and answer this, I'm curious. Most of the openly LGBTQ officials in this country are white men. Is there a particular burden, a challenge, or even an advantage to being an LGBTQ person of color running for office?
I'm not sure in my experience if it is a burden per se. I mean, I see it kind of as an opportunity. I find myself in most spaces, I am usually the only person of color. You know, in the legislature, I'm usually, if we're having a staff meeting and there's 20 people, it's maybe me and one other person of color. So it's something, and even throughout school, I mean, it's something I've kind of been used to, but it does also give me the opportunity to sometimes give voice to people of color, the issues. And I mean, I think that's part of the something like this is also very helpful because when we are running for office, when we are in those spaces, I know that, for example, in Southfield, we had never done a Pride Month resolution until I got there. And so, you know, me being there, me being that voice, to be able to bring that up, I don't think that would have happened. And it's the same thing, me being a person of color. Sometimes me being in the room and me being that voice, it kind of helps bring forth those issues that some people might not have thought about before.
We talk a lot about racism in general, and there's plenty of racism in the gay community. Do you also balance homophobia in the Black community?
Well,
do you face any, Amani?
I think that, you know, being at the intersection of being gay and being Black, there's always like, there's always a side to be on. And I think that it is more challenging to be openly gay in a majority Black community and run for office, just because there is some homophobia in the Black community. And yeah, that can be terrifying for candidates.
Okay, we're gonna move on to the county folks, but I want to remind people who are watching on Facebook that you can ask questions that we will get to any of these folks at the end of the program after we talk to the folks from the county and then the state legislators as well. And that my name is Steve Freeth. I am the news and features editor at Our Detroit Magazine. And we are pleased to welcome only a few. We have three county officials. We have Dave Coulter, who was elected to his first term very recently as the county executive in Oakland County. We also have Jason Morgan, who is on the Washtenaw County Commission, and Katie Scott has appeared from her job at the hospital, where I assume she's doing heroic things for all of us who need healthcare. I'd like to start by asking any of you who want to answer the question, is there a difference? I mean, was it an artificial thing for me to break out county politics versus city politics? Are they basically the same thing, only somewhat different geographies?
I mean, I'm fine to go first
Sure,
and talk about this too, because I would say they're pretty vastly different animals. Sometimes I want to do city politics because I want to create ordinances that's not in the purview of county commission on some of the things I'd like to do. And the city can do some more of those things that I'm looking to do. But I think what we do at the county is we really manage a lot of health and human services that come from the state. I think we're probably closer to looking at like state government than city government. A lot of very similar things, but definitely a different role that we fill than city government. I could go on more, but I'd love to hear what Jason and Dave have to say too.
Okay, Dave.
You know, it's funny. I started my political career as a county commissioner way back in 2002. So I feel like the old guy on this call. And I served for 4 terms. And almost the only question I ever got in my 4 terms on the county commission is, what does a county commissioner? Oh, that's great, you're a county commissioner. What does a county commissioner do? And then you have to explain all of these various services. Then I became mayor of Ferndale, and I did that for 9 years after that. And everybody knows what a mayor does or what they want you to do, from potholes to rats to everything. It's very intimate. It's very close to the people and very different in that regard. Now I'm back at the county, but not so much invisible because I'm following a guy who is kind of a political legend in this region, Brooks Patterson. So in part because of him, people are aware of this role. But directly to your question, it is a very different animal. And I think Katie said it right. It probably is more like a state government than it is a city government in a lot of ways, and in the ways that it interacts with its residents.
So Jason, does that mean that it's sort of more removed from these questions about LGBTQ rights, human rights? Is it more of a bureaucratic institute, point of view than a legislative one?
I don't think so. I think building on what Katie and Dave said, I think the issues of LGBT issues are actually equally as important at the county level as they would be the city level, or even almost the state level, actually, because we are implementing programs at the ground level. What I tell people about county government is that county government is about human services. It's about people-focused work. All of what we do is serving people and making sure that those programs are reaching LGBTQ communities and that they're serving those communities, and quite frankly, that they don't discriminate against anyone, is really, really important. A lot of the work that we do for the LGBT community is very intersectional with issues of race, gender, poverty, all of these things that really rely on making sure your government is working properly and ethically. And I think we have an incredible amount of influence on that here at the county level.
So we have 2 Washtenaw County commissioners here. I live in Superior Township, so you're governing us to some extent, although we have a different county commissioner, so I guess she's the one I should be complaining to when the snow is still there. But my question is, Washtenaw County is a pretty progressive place. I mean, it's got Ann Arbor, it's got the University of Michigan. Like, I asked this question earlier of Ferndale and Hazel Park, but what are the big LGBTQ problems that exist in our county, and what are you doing about them?
Well, I can jump on that one. A lot of folks think that we are doing things perfectly here in the county, which I appreciate. I'd love that because we are a very progressive county, but we still have more work to do. This past year, we spent about a year drafting our first ever countywide equity and inclusion statement, along with a thoroughly updated non-discrimination and anti-harassment policy, which modified our building policies to ensure that every restroom that's single stall is converted to gender neutral, that we also make sure that anyone who uses any of our restrooms should feel comfortable using the restroom of their gender identity. And that's just one tiny sliver about LGBT issues. But for me, I think it means something to make that statement to the public, that they should feel comfortable, welcomed, and loved in our county. But that non-discrimination and equity and inclusion statement really is, I think, a bold statement to say that we are on the cutting edge of these things. And in a community like Washtenaw, where we are very progressive and we're able to pass these things, we can be a model for other places. Oakland County and Dave and the Board of Commissioners they're doing a lot of really great progressive things right now too. So we can play off each other to say, let's develop bold progressive policies at the county level that can be replicated elsewhere by other communities as they become more progressive.
So Dave, do you have the similar thing? Do you have a statement or a human rights ordinance? And also Oakland County, up until 2 minutes ago, was relatively conservative. And in fact, if I'm not mistaken, you're the first Democrat to hold this position ever. So I'm curious to know, do you still have to balance a politically more diverse electorate?
Yeah. So to your first question, yes, we did not have a non-discrimination policy in Oakland County government when I got there. And one of the first things I did in the first couple of months of being in office, working with our Board of Commissioners who had to ultimately adopt it, is a very broad and comprehensive non-discrimination policy. It was incredible to me that in this day and age, a county as sophisticated and successful as Oakland County didn't have that. So that's just one example of how it makes a difference that I'm there. But you're right, I am the first Democrat, and our board is our legislative body, our Board of Commissioners, is 11 Democrats and 10 Republicans. So Oakland County is definitely trending blue. We have voted blue for president for the last several cycles, but Oakland County voted for Rick Snyder. And so what I'd say just politically about Oakland County is, even when it was Republican, it was more of that kind of moderate Mitch, I was going to say Mitch McConnell. Mitch Romney kind of establishment Republican, sort of fiscally conservative, socially moderate to progressive kind of Republican. So we're not talking about the Tea Party kinds of folks that are here. This is a very educated and wealthy county. And so it has been interesting to navigate that. But when you, and I ran a campaign last year where I had to do a lot of polling, and I was quite encouraged, and it confirmed for me when we did up polling on a lot of the various issues that truly, when it comes to social issues, when it comes to LGBT equality, when it comes to being a welcoming county for immigrants, when it comes to women's rights and any kind of discrimination, this is a county that embraces progressive policies across the board, Republican and Democrat. It cuts across both parties, and I think that's unique about Oakland County. I'm not sure that there's a lot of counties out there that are like that.
I just want to piggyback on what Dave said too. I grew up in Oakland County, so I have my family is still there, so I can see how Oakland County has changed. And Steve, it's events like this that are helping, I think, change that landscape. So I do think that, Dave, that you're right, that Oakland County was kind of old school Republican, the type of which we don't really see anymore. But I think that it's events like this, and it's people who are open, LGBTQ, running for office and being open about that and having that visibility, that matters. And so you're talking about people like my parents who are still there, who maybe 20 years ago or 30 years ago couldn't have conceived of thinking about how Oakland County could change, or LGBTQ people serving openly in office and voting for those people. Now we're out there, we have that visibility, and I think that changes the dynamic of what people are seeing. That's part of the changing landscape of Oakland County, is having so many people on this call alone who are in Oakland County and who are open and running for office. That's helping change that political landscape.
Now, Oh,
Katie, I just want to say that is a great point. And I want to say a couple of, just really briefly, if you don't mind. 19 years ago when I got elected, I don't think I could have seen myself in this position. I mean, it was such a different landscape. So you're right, it's important. I mean, Harvey Milk always said the most important thing we can do is just be out and visible. It's harder to attack us when we're in their face and we're one of their neighbors or their friends. So I do think these kinds of forums are important. And I just have to say, as maybe the old timer here that's been in elective office for 19 years and couldn't imagine this happening for me at some point, it is, I get chills seeing all the, especially the young faces on this call that just jumped into this, you know, Amani's answer of why not now? Why not me? You know, that is, it makes me happy to hear that, because when I was his age, there were a lot, my voice was telling me a lot of reasons why not me, why this wouldn't maybe be possible, why not now? And I love the fact that here we are in 2021, and so many intelligent, creative, talented people get to pursue their dream in politics without having to navigate those sort of sexual orientation dynamics. Is it just, it gives me chills. It really does.
Well, and Steve, you think Washtenaw is very progressive, but I'm sorry to jump in here, but Katie and I are the first openly gay and first openly lesbian county commissioners Washtenaw County has ever had. I was the first one elected 4 years ago as the first ever gay Washtenaw County commissioner. 2 years later, we got Katie elected, and so we have a gay and a lesbian now, which is fantastic. But before that, for all of the couple hundred years before that, there was never somebody openly gay on our county commission. And so we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're not the last ones and that we continue to build on that.
Now, I do want to mention, well, the fair point, but I do want to mention that actually in 1974, Kathy Kazachenko was the first openly gay or lesbian politician to be elected to anything in this country in Ann Arbor for the city council, not the county commission, the city council. And I believe that Ypsilanti has had a lesbian mayor. And I know that there, as I said earlier, one of the city councilmen in Ann Arbor, Travis Redina, who is actually right now having a city council meeting, so he can't be here. So there are more than that of you, but it's always wonderful to learn about the first of different types. And I guess one of the things I'm wondering is, first of all, I don't know this. Are Jason, Dave, and Katie, are you single? Are you married? Do you have partners? And there's a reason I'm asking the question. I'm just curious. Are you single? Any of you?
You have somebody in mind for me, Steve?
The reason I'm wondering is because when you're a public official, an elected official, I wonder how different it is to be dating. You know, so much of dating goes on now on apps and on online and stuff. And I wonder, do you find yourself, since you are an elected official, in an at least an awkward place about like what you post online, what you know, pictures you put on of yourself, or how you interact with people on sites and stuff? I'm just curious.
Okay, well,
Anybody?
I am not dating anybody. I do have an ex-wife and a kid, but I do think that you're right. I do think being elected changes some of that, because even on an app, sometimes I'm like, I don't know if I put my picture on here and people recognize me, like this is a little weird. So it does change a dynamic. But then ultimately, I think I'm also so busy, I'm not really sure when I'd have the time to date somebody, or who'd have the patience to be dating somebody with, you know, 2 full-time jobs and back in grad school and a kid. So that's why I asked if you knew somebody, because if you know somebody patient enough for that, I want to know her.
Any of the guys?
I'm very happily dating somebody, which I'm most thrilled about, because it takes that whole question out of the equation for me. So I don't have to worry about that. While I was single, it was a huge worry, exactly as Katie said, because you're put in this awkward position. But no, I'm very fortunate to be dating a very nice gentleman.
And so I'm single currently, and like Katie said, I don't know if it's an excuse, but I feel like I have I don't know when I would fit in dating in my schedule these days, but it's not that I'm not open to it. I've had long-term relationships before, but you know, you bring up a very practical question, and that all of us in the gay community have to struggle with. Personally, for myself, I'm just not on the apps because I've become a little bit too high profile. When I was on the county commission or even as mayor of Ferndale, it was a little easier. But once the television commercials started going up and I started getting recognized at the Costco, I said, this is just not going to. So, you know, there are sacrifices that you make for being in public life. And as you make in any career or profession that you choose. And so that's one of them.
So now, Dave, when you ran for this office, there were actually a number of high-profile LGBTQ people who supported your opponent, Andy Meisner. They lost, you won. But I wonder, did you feel unappreciated by the gay community, or did you feel like there was a certain sort of perverse evidence of progress that gay people didn't simply have to support the gay person because they're gay?
I can't believe you asked that question. That's hilarious. Look, politics is a tough business. Somebody said, if you want a friend in politics, get a dog. It's a tough business, and we know each other and we know lots of people. So, you know, we tend to be in the same circles, and it's not unusual that we would know multiple people. But to your point, I think it probably is some sort of kind of perverse progress that we don't just support someone because they're openly gay, right? I do have an affinity towards, you know, trying to be a mentor or a supporter or a helper of people that are LGBTQ that want to get in this business, but you know, there's more to politics than your sexual orientation, and those things, you know, just come out in a campaign.
Is that right?
I just want to say I was a strong supporter of Dave Coulter. I don't live in Oakland County, so I shouldn't vote. But I was very happy to support Dave because he is, not only because he's gay, but he was definitely the best candidate, despite the fact that I do love Andy as well.
So I guess I would like to kind of finish by asking you the same question I asked the city folks. Have you had homophobic run-ins with other elected officials with whom you have to work, or awkward moments or anything? And also, who are they? And what are their phone numbers? No. But yeah, I mean, have you had any of these kinds of just, you know, unpleasant experiences? Maybe even when you've gone around campaigning, did anybody say anything to you or make an issue of anything? Dave? Jason?
You know, I answer it this way. When I was on the county commission, a guy got elected from the Rochester area called Tom McMillan. Some people may remember him. He was a right-wing homophobe, right Christian, very ideological guy. And when he got elected, everybody was kind of looking at the two of us. Here I am, the first openly gay guy. Here he is, the sort of right-wing, you know, guy. And I'm going to be honest with you, you know, I consider it a challenge to befriend people like that and see if I can't, you know, peel behind the onion and see what's going on. So I was nice to the guy, and to my surprise, he was nice to me. And we actually ended up working on some things together. And I found myself appreciating his directness in terms of his issues with LGBTQ issues, more so than some of his moderate Republican friends who would tell me to my face, oh, I'm supportive and I'm this, but they would never support you. They would never be with you when you needed them in a fight. And on some fights, he would be there because he was the kind of guy that just, stuck to his guns and said what he wanted. So the funny story was the Republicans got so mad at him that they moved him over to the Democratic side of the aisle and they sat him next to me because they thought that would just be hilarious. But honestly, we got along much better than, like I said, I did with some of the moderate Republicans that I thought were a lot less genuine.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to our state legislators now. And I want to remind everybody that my name is Steve Freese. I am the news and features editor at Our Detroit Magazine. This is our LGBTQ elected official summit. And we are about to welcome two, well, not the only two, but the two state legislators from our region, Jeremy Moss, who is a state senator, and Laurie Pohutsky, I hope I said that right, who is a state representative. I believe that Jeremy is the very first out person to be elected to the state Senate. I could be wrong about that.
No, you're right.
Oh, I thought I had that right. So welcome. And I guess I want to ask you guys, as you've been listening, if you've been around, I know some of you have been busy tonight, but as you've been listening to the county, the city, and the school district people talking, are there ideas and thoughts that you get out of talking to the folks on these other levels of government that you take to Lansing? And if so, what? Either one of you?
No, I'll take that. I think that we belong in every place. We belong in every level of office. Our voices matter in every level of office. In every place that decisions are made, LGBT people belong at the table. And so, that's just my biggest takeaway. And I really want to piggyback off of Amani's answer of what's the rush, and he had the perfect answer to that. Why not? It shouldn't be remarkable that LGBTQ people or young people or people of color run for office. That shouldn't be unique. That shouldn't be special. It should be expected.
Laurie, any thoughts on your?
I agree with everything that Jeremy just reiterated. Basically, I think it's important. Representation is important. But having out members of the community at every level is important. And I don't think that there's a rush. I think that this is just the natural progression of things. So why would we try to fabricate a hesitation or some type of quota or something like that? I think it's just, this is the way things are. And I think it's important for, our community to be reflected in elected leadership.
Now, I don't know the numbers on the rest of the folks here, but Representative Pohutsky won 2 elections to the state house, each time by fewer than 230 votes, something like that. It was incredibly close both times. The second time you ran, which was last year in 2020, you were defending a seat that you had flipped. You had won it from Republican to Democrat, and then you were defending it. And in the middle of all that, in June of 2020, you decided to go on Twitter and disclose that you're bisexual. I don't know if that was
That's
well-known.
not quite true. I was already out. I was
Oh.
already out.
Okay, so you were already out. So you didn't. So how did you come out? Tell me how you came out.
I've been out since I was 19. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm sorry because I thought that these tweets were your coming out story. Okay. No. Never mind.
There were homophobic attacks against me in my first election. So no, I'd been out. It was not. there was no announcement ever because I had just been out. During my first election, I was married to a cishet man. And because biphobia is a very real thing, I think that kind of influenced how people looked at my outness. But I have been out since I've been 19 years old. So there was never a statement because that's just who I am. And I've never tried to hide from that. But yeah, no, I've been out the entire time.
So what happened in your first race? What kind of dirty trick went on?
It was very subtle. It was a very dog whistly type of attack, but there was an ad that went out of me at Pride. And it was just a picture of me that I had posted of myself at Pride. And the caption was, doesn't embody family values and, too far left for Livonia, which is the district that I represent, is the city of Livonia. So it was very subtle. And I think that was also painted by the fact that I was at the time married to a straight man. But no, there was definitely some very gross dog whistle attacks that went out.
Did it work at all? I mean, do you have any idea if you were campaigning, did anybody come up to you and say anything, or did you knock on any doors? Did anybody care?
No one seemed to. I mean, don't get me wrong, like there's always homophobes out there, right? So there have definitely been doors that I have knocked on where people have told me, I believe in marriage between a man and a woman, blah, 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 but it wasn't really directed at me. I don't think it had anything to do with anything. I don't think it was impactful at all. And in fact, there was almost a doubling down in my re-election where the candidate that I was running against was opposed to marriage equality. And I remember having conversations with people where I said, I think that's really going to backfire. I don't think that's a winning issue. And I think that embodying bigotry like that does not actually play well here at all.
You mentioned biphobia, and Luke mentioned this as well. And the two of you are the only two here to talk to this issue. Where does that come from? More from straight people than gay people, or more than gay people? Because I'm a gay man of a certain vintage where almost everybody at some point claimed to be bi on their way out the door. Obviously, that's not the same thing. But I think that experience, I wonder if it's the gay folks or the straight folks that are giving you trouble for that.
I think our community has come a really long way. When I first came out, I definitely, faced a lot of criticism from the community, particularly, depending on my relationship status. If I was in a same-sex relationship, then I was great with the community. If I was not, obviously there was a little bit more, I was kept more at a little bit of a distance. It's been a minute since I've experienced that from the community. Professionally, though, there is a lot of, I think, unknowing and like well-intentioned, but nevertheless biphobia from our straight allies. Just last week, I had a professional friend, lecture me on the terminology our community uses. And I had to stop her and I said, you know, right? And she goes, well, right, but you're bi, so I didn't know if you knew. And I was like, oh, okay, fine. So it definitely makes its way out. But these days, I think that I experience it more from the straight community and, very well-meaning allies. No one really means to fall into that trap, but it does happen.
Jeremy, you've been in politics a while. You're not all that old, but you've been in politics for long enough that when you won in 2018, you said, and I hope I got this right off of the internet, that you said what what once a generation ago was a liability, now I think is an asset for a candidate to be their true self so they can advocate for progress. Essentially saying that you think that being out as a gay man running for the state Senate helped you with, I guess is my interpretation of that, or it certainly didn't hurt you. But you were at one time the youngest ever Southfield City Council member. How different is it to run now as an out person than it was the first time you did it?
You know, Dave brought up a quote that I think about a lot. It's from Harvey Milk, that the most political thing you can do is to come out. And so there were very few of us even 10 years ago. So I was first elected to the Southfield City Council 10 years ago, and you could not have a Zoom full of LGBT elected officials in the state of Michigan or Metro Detroit like we have right here today. So there are very few of us, and we supported one another. But you had to be very careful about entering into spaces that you were the first person there. And so it was rather difficult to run a campaign. I was young, I was recently out. I didn't know how to talk about it, politically speaking, you know, being gay. And it was something that I really tried to avoid for the most part. But as we talked about what progress we need to make to keep Michigan inclusive, to keep Michigan competitive, to keep Michigan on the forefront of equity and equality and diversity, yeah, I think that I became more comfortable with it. And then the state of Michigan became more comfortable with it and started to elect openly gay candidates and openly LGBTQ candidates because they realized that, you know, as these issues come before us, especially when I ran for the state house, we were talking about the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. Well, nobody was at the table that was part of the community making these decisions. So it was a benefit. It was an asset. As these political topics came forward, you know, we needed our voice at the table, but even more so than that, you know, and first running for office in 2011, but, you know, being a young person that was interested in politics too, there weren't a lot of role models to look up to. People hadn't blazed this path here in Michigan. I mean, obviously we've had out officials, you know, since the Ann Arbor City Councilwoman in the 1970s, and we made slow progress. But I wanted to prove to the next elected official that you can be LGBTQ and successful, that you can get elected by being an openly LGBTQ candidate. So, you know, being out wasn't just because, you know, being out wasn't just a benefit to put me into the fight, but it also recognized that anybody else can achieve these goals as well. We've never had an out senator before. When I'm talking about LGBTQ issues on the Senate floor, nobody's ever done that before from our perspective. So I didn't run to be I ran and I was the first, but I didn't run to be the only. And so, you know, running as your authentic self is a benefit because it benefits the next person who comes along as well.
Okay, we have one or two more questions in the state block. I want to remind everybody that if you're on Facebook and you have a question for any of these folks, they're all here. If you have a question for any of them, please, now is a good time to spit it out and we'll try to get it in. The important question for the state legislators, of course, is where are we right now in terms of moving forward on a statewide anti-discrimination law for Michigan? And does it even matter anymore, given that the Supreme Court last year ruled that discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity essentially is not permissible under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So what are you guys up to? You guys are the people carrying this torch in Lansing. Where are we?
So what the Supreme Court ruling said is that it extended federal employment protections to the LGBTQ community, and that's it. There's a lot of gaps there. In fact, it doesn't extend employment protections to those who work in places with 15 employees or fewer, so small businesses. you can still experience discrimination. In public accommodations, services, in housing, it doesn't extend protections. So it was a very narrow ruling with a very narrow interpretation of sex that extends protections to the LGBTQ community. So right here in the state of Michigan, Representative Pohutsky and I are being very intentional in introducing legislation to extend discrimination protection in all employment, in housing, in public accommodations and services based on specifically sexual orientation and gender identity. So we cannot rest on a Supreme Court ruling, which is a moment in time based on what those justices in that moment interpreted as sex discrimination. We can't take that and celebrate and think that, you know, the fight is over and we've done all that we can do. We have to be very intentional and very clear in the language here in Michigan law that if you are gay, bi, transgender, that you should be afforded protections in the workplace, in your housing, and when receiving public services.
So Laurie, where are we? I mean, what's the latest news on this? And I mean, will the Republican-run legislature do anything with this?
Jeremy buried the lead on that a little bit. For the first time, it is bipartisan in the House and the Senate. You know, the term previously, we did have one lone Republican on the House bill, which is still the same. There are additional Republicans that have said they did not want to put their name to it, but they are willing to vote for it on the floor. And in addition to that, there is a Republican co-sponsor over in the Senate with, I believe, 2 other members who are not currently on it, but are supportive of it. So there are absolutely the votes to get this through the Senate. And Jeremy and I have both had phone calls from, you know, corporate stakeholders who are very excited to get this through. I do think that the one barrier, and this is no surprise if you've been watching the news lately, the one, I don't want to say barrier, roadblock that we're facing is making sure that there are trans protections that are maintained in that bill. A lot of the compromise that has been proposed when it comes to this is dropping the T, or, you know, putting some really, frankly, heinous anti-trans language in there. That is a non-starter for us. We
will not compromise on that.
No. So we've been very, very clear about that. That is dead in the water when it comes to us. So that is one thing that we have to be very vigilant, and we have had to be very, very, very intentional when it came to the discussions that we had, both with stakeholders, but also with our colleagues across the aisle and on the same side of the aisle. That is not a compromise. That is a non-starter for us.
And, you know, decades ago, as you first asked me on the first question, yeah, you know, maybe it was a liability to run authentically as an openly gay candidate. But I think right now in 2021, it's a liability to run as a homophobic candidate.
It's worth noting that we have a question that I was about to ask anyway. So that works out very nicely. Somebody named Brad Hatfield. Yeah, Brad Hatfield on Facebook is interested in knowing whether there is leverage that we can apply, that you can apply to the legislature through corporate America, particularly General Motors, the big corporations in our state. We've seen this in other states where voting right laws that seem to be restrictive have been opposed by large corporations, and that seems to be kind of a new trend for corporate America to be fairly firmly on the progressive side of some of these issues. So I'm curious to know, are you, as you're working on this, are you getting help from the big automakers or the big mortgage companies that we have in the state?
There are definitely large corporations that have reached out to me, and I'm sure Jeremy can say the same. You know, AT&T didn't even have to be reached out to. They reached out to us of their own accord to talk about it. And frankly, I don't really think that in the conversations that we've had, there has been very little leverage that we've had to apply, because at the same time that we were getting ready to introduce these bills, there was a statewide news story about a former elected official who ended up out of a job because of his anti-LGBTQ stance. So, you know, that wasn't something that we had to say. It was out there and everybody knew it. You know, so the rationale that, oh, well, you know, people are worried about primaries from the right and things like that, that's fine. But in a term limited state, that, okay, you might need to worry about your election, but you're going to have a job after you're done. And there are ramifications to denying people basic human rights, as it turns out. Who would have thought?
And we're talking about Lee Chatfield, who was the speaker. And interestingly, last year in Hour, I did this big long piece about Dana Nessel, who is our first out statewide elected official, our attorney general. And she and Lee Chatfield were sort of like buddies, and they're not necessarily friends, but they were friendly. And then I don't actually know all the details, but did Lee Chatfield say something specific about LGBT people that got him in trouble with his boss? Anybody want to answer that? Because I don't remember the story.
I mean, it was an electoral history. He, you know, when he was speaker, he was asked if he would move Elliott Larson legislation, and he said if people were being discriminated against because of their gender identity or sexual orientation, he would know about it. I mean, he ran a primary against a candidate who was supportive of amending the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and made it very clear that he was not. So, you know, it wasn't a huge homophobic rant or anything like that, not by any means. Like, you know, Lee was always very, very cordial to me. I mean, I was a priority to get out of the house. So, you know, with that addendum being that caveat being on there, but, you know, I mean, Jeremy had an excellent professional relationship bordering on friendship with him. So it's not that Lee Chatfield is just a bigot in the conventional sense of the words, but he had an opportunity to move on legislation that would have protected the LGBTQ community in this state, and he didn't.
One more quick question about this, which is, if the legislature does not act, are we expecting that this will be on the ballot for the state's voters to decide, I guess, in 2022?
So the petitions have been collected. Fair and Equal Michigan has almost 500,000 petitions that are before the Secretary of State for recommendation of certification. And then this comes before the legislature. And then that's kind of where the unknown is. If it comes before the legislature, Representative Pohutsky and I are confident that the votes are there right then and there to have an up or down vote on these petitions and put it into law then and there, and be done with this issue. Unfortunately, I don't know about the Speaker of the House, the new Speaker of the House, but we have a huge obstacle in the Senate Majority Leader's office who won't even let a Pride Month resolution pass, let alone enacting LGBTQ protections. So the legislature can send it to the ballot as it is, or the legislature can send it to the ballot with a competing proposal. So we might be voting on one proposal with LGBT rights. We might be voting on a proposal with LGBT rights and LGBT rights with a religious exemption. So there's going to have to be a huge information campaign about what's even going to be on the ballot should the legislature make the decision to do it. Representative Pohutsky and I have provided an off-ramp. We've collected the votes. We got every Democrat on board, and we've even got enough Republicans on board. So we've been saying, put it up for a vote in the legislature, avoid a campaign that could really put the LGBT community out front as a political punching bag in the context of a political campaign. So we're really working hard to see these petitions. If our bills don't get enacted into law, we'd really like to see when the petitions do come before the legislature, it to be put for an up or down vote in the legislature itself.
Now we have one more question from Facebook, but before we move on, I want to ask everybody a couple of things. One is, we have no transgender politically elected people in our state. And I'm wondering, are there transgender political activists who any of you are expecting to break that barrier? Who should we be looking for? And this is for anybody who wants to answer the question.
Well, I would start off by saying that, many of us are the firsts. And so, I'm incredibly encouraging of the trans community. Don't wait for someone else to be the first if you think you can be the first. And right now in the legislature, to be quite honest with you, we've gotten to a point where we aren't fighting these battles on the LGB front, but they are tackling and they are going against the most vulnerable members of our community, the trans community. And Representative Pohutsky and I, along with Representative Sneller, who completes the trifecta of our out officials in the legislature, we will stand up, go to bat, and speak in support of the trans community all day and every day. But there's just nothing like somebody from the community speaking on behalf of their own lived experience. So I know this is Facebook Live. We want trans candidates. We want, if anybody's watching, we want trans candidates to run. We need to hear your voice in the legislature. You have your own unique lived experience that needs to be shared with everybody.
I think it's interesting to note from a historical point of view that the dedication to the trans element of the alphabet soup that we all have is actually relatively new. I mean, Barney Frank, a very, very well-regarded, revered, groundbreaking congressman from Massachusetts, openly gay, was okay with, and it was very open about being okay with not doing transgender if it meant we could get 3/4 of the loaf. That's not the way that elected officials who are gay behave anymore, is it?
So I'll say this, Wisconsin was the very first state to enact a civil rights law that included protections based on sexual orientation, and they left off gender identity. So this is in the 80s, the very first state, and they told the trans community, don't worry, we're gonna protect you next. We're gonna reach back out to you next, and it's never happened. We don't leave people behind.
Anybody else have any particular trans friends that you think we should know about, that we should be looking out for in campaigns ahead of us?
I don't want to out anybody who's not ready to say that they're not ready for running for office, but I do know that at least one trans person who is thinking about running for office. And I would just say, like I think most of my colleagues, all of my colleagues on this call, that if there is a trans person out there who's listening to this, who's thinking about running for office, please do it. Every one of us is asking you to do this, to be active, to step up. And I feel fairly certain that all of us would offer our support and our knowledge about running for office and what it means to do that. I personally will tell you everything I know, which is only about running a small county race. There's some people who know more than that, but you have a supportive community here. And so consider yourself asked and go for it.
Jacob Welch, who is 24 years old, is watching on Facebook Live, and he is asking sort of the obvious question, which is, what advice do you give a young LGBT person who is considering running for local political office? And I guess, Amani, you're as young as he is, so what's your advice?
The only advice I have is to just do it and to knock every door. And the rest will come naturally.
Okay. Did any of you, I believe some of you may have done the Run for Something, which is a camp. Was it you, Amani? I know I read this. Run for Something is a site or a group that primarily, I guess, progressive, encouraging people who may have never considered running for public office before, or who have. They encourage you to run for something. And what do they do for you? Like it's a national organization. Do they sort of give you seminars, or how does it work?
Yeah, so they'll give you seminars, trainings. One of the biggest things that they helped me with was I had no idea how to raise money. I was 22 and I didn't have any money, and neither did my friends. So I asked, how do I fundraise for a campaign? And they just told me, think about things that people in your community would be doing anyway, and then host an event and charge for it. So that's what I did.
Like what? What did you do?
So I did a lot of creative events when I ran for city council in 19. I did some hustle and soul food nights. So we hired a dance instructor to teach hustles or line dances, and then had a caterer cook soul food. I hosted probably 6 or 7 or 8 of those. That's how I raised the bulk of my money. And I also did a couple of wine tours. There's 3 wineries in the Jackson, Michigan area, and we loaded 50 people on a bus and took them on a tour. I raised $2,500. So those are good ideas for anyone who's looking out there.
Any other pearls of wisdom from the rest of the gang here?
You know, I might just say, if I may, oh, did I step on someone?
No,
that regardless of your orientation or your ethnicity or your sexuality or your, you're running to represent people, and they're looking at you and making a judgment about you, about whether you will go to whatever level of government you have and represent their interests. So I would say that if the only thing you have going for you and the only reason that you want to run is because you're an LGBTQ person, you might want to think about whether that's the issue that will motivate the people in your district. I think that people that we represent, they trust us to represent them. And you have to remember that, we are public servants. We are there to try to represent the folks that we serve. And so I would say, make sure you understand why you want to run, what you want to do when you get there, what issues you're really passionate about, and be authentic about them, including being authentic about yourself. And that just becomes part of it. But if it's the only thing, I think it makes it more difficult to be a candidate, frankly.
Anybody else?
That was exactly what I was going to say.
Greg.
Is making sure that you.
Jason.
Oh, sorry, Greg. Making sure that you are running for the right reasons. I worked for John Dingle, and he ingrained in me that you run because you want to serve people. Your entire purpose should be wanting to serve people. Being gay is extremely important, and representation absolutely matters. So we want to get young LGBT people engaged in the community, but the biggest thing I think is wanting to be there for the right reasons, and just starting to get slowly involved in the community through volunteer organizations. One of my first things I was involved in was the Jim Toy Community Center, where I was very involved for over 5 years before running for office and being an LGBT activist. So getting engaged in the community, knowing the people that you're going to be asking for support from, and really showing and proving that you're going to show up for them. I think, as Dave said it so articulately, but just making sure that you're running for the right reasons and that you're running to serve other people and represent the community, I think is the biggest and most important thing you can do if you want to run for office at some point.
Well, so
and I would add onto that, every local community has boards and commissions, and it's really great to get involved on an arts commission, a beautification commission. If you have planning experience, get on a planning commission. You get to know people equally who are passionate about your community, and you get to know your local officials much better. And that allows you to get into that political arena.
I do want to mention that we do have one more person who has finally joined us. Pontiac School Board President Mike McGuinness is now with us for the last couple of moments. And so I guess I'm curious to know, Mike, you missed the whole thing, but that's okay. You had to govern, which is, it's not a little issue. I'm curious, in Pontiac, what are the LGBTQ challenges over there? And since I asked the other question, I meant to ask it of the state legislators. Have you been dealing with this question that's been coming up a lot about transgender student athletes?
And thank you very much for that. I'm really glad you've recorded the session, so that way I'll be able to really sink my teeth into it. Monday nights are our school board meeting nights, and this one ran long. Heavy days for school districts throughout the state and the country. For trans student rights, that controversy has not fallen on our doorstep just yet, but it's certainly a possibility. The Pontiac community has so many challenges in terms of socioeconomic adversity. It's a community that just has suffered so much loss over the decades as the General Motors footprint has receded, as these macro level trends have been impacted. We sometimes on the outside looking in don't get viewed as sort of a gay mecca, but there actually is a sizable LGBTQ plus population in the greater Pontiac community. And there are some certain challenges with sort of visibility and comfort level where our LGBTQ community members just feel comfortable putting themselves out there for elective office. And I know I had those same sort of hesitations on, especially for a school district position. Would there be some alarm, consideration, hesitancy? And just as with any other sort of phase of life or opportunities and challenges, I've been able to sort of be that first example for some people to say, hey, actually, Pontiac is extremely diverse, welcoming, inclusive. Certainly there's adversity to overcome, but the role and the opportunity of an elected official is to plant the flag of openness and welcoming for the community. And it sends a message so that way others can follow, but also people get a sense of where the community's values are with their vote sort of representing that. And so I'm delighted that Pontiac School Board does have an out member and currently serving as president, elected by the peers, fellow members of the Board of Education.
Have there been any LGBTQ issues that have come before you on the board, and do you think you made a difference in them?
I definitely think that I've been able to sort of raise the visibility and awareness and expand the conversation. Sometimes I wrestle with how strident I want to be and how proactive and progressive I want to sort of be on these matters. We're a district that had massive financial difficulties, a deficit of $52 million. So we were really on the brink of survival. And so we've just in the last few months have come out of that. Our structural deficit's been eliminated. So we get to survive and exist as a public school district. So there hasn't been much of a room for conversation for anything that's beyond sort of these sort of financial survival matters. But that's something I actually have to wrestle with, is how much I want to make sure that our issues of inclusion and protection and visibility are on the table. And so that's sort of like an internal battle I have with myself about, just of all the many issues before the school board. We have not had that many, but there have been a few votes that I've taken in part out of principle, not that it was going to change the outcome, in part because we were under a consent agreement with the state and a lot was preordained, but like where edicts from the state legislature, especially around family planning, some other matters where their funding is tied into sort of their social agenda that they're trying to push that's very regressive, and taking the votes to say, well, I don't support that philosophically, so I'm not going to add my name to that, although it will be enacted. Same with some things that have come federally with changes to Title IX, et cetera, that it's very challenging because you want to ensure that the federal funding, the state funding is not thwarted. So that way you're not cutting off an $80 million public school district from being able to educate the children of the community. But it's still sort of using your space to have those conversations and let them know why you're staking that position and why you object to sort of these social doctrinaire positions from the conservative legislature, when that manifests down to the local level, the real life implications that has for children and families, which can be very detrimental.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we got to hear from you. And I am incredibly grateful to all of you. I have so many more questions that we don't have time for, but it was a really kind of amazing, kind of historic moment to have. I guess we have now 14 of you, and I believe that right now the count in our region is about 17 openly gay city, school, county and state legislators representing us, plus some judges and some other things. But in terms of legislation, so it's been a real pleasure. I think we can leave it there, unfortunately, because time to go to bed. But thank you all for your time. It's been great. Anybody have anything else they're dying to say and didn't get to say over the last hour and 45 minutes? Anybody?
It's pretty amazing that Oakland County has an out county executive. So even though that's been celebrated, I just want to say that is badass.
All right.
I actually, if I could just
legislator
say,
and let them know to support Senator Moss's and Representative Pohutsky's bills to amend the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. This is our last chance for the legislature to do it before we have to do it ourselves.
Yeah, Luke beat me to it.
You.
And the sort of good news, bad news here is that the odds are that the next time somebody tries to do this, there'll be even more of you, and it'll be impossible. I mean, this is not easy to wrangle so many people and give everybody a chance to have their say. But
only if people run. Only if people run.
Well, yes, they certainly people have to run. And I also wonder, I guess, one last question, which is, you're all Democrats. Is that a problem? Do you think that we cross a Rubicon when gay Republicans are also running in our state?
Well, Luke is not a Democrat.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know about Luke.
Oh, Luke, you're still not a Democrat?
God, no, I'm an independent.
All right. Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Everybody out on Facebook. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.